People who wear white after Labor Day.
Oh shit, there's cat vomit on the...
What
the fuck?
We're living in a nightmare!
We have to film the video still!
Why does this happen every time?
No!
I'm telling you, our cats were sent by Mormon Jesus to thwart us!
Support us on Patreon, he needs to see a specialist!
This is true love. These cats who are trying to sabotage us at every turn.
Okay, so we'll just act like that's not a thing.
Zelf. On the shelf. Welcome to Mormonism's most harmful teachings. Today we are talking about... sex. It's a dirty word, the 3-letter word.
I feel dirty even spelling it. So for those of you who don't know, in Mormonism, it is taught that sexual sin, which means anything outside of a straight couple having sex in their married person bedroom, is the sin next to murder. The second worst thing you can do, and the top thing that you can do is like no one really like even gets in a position where they could do that or whatever. So
okay,
it's like, this is kind of the main one.
You're gonna get an armchair apologist in the comments.
I know,
She's like,
I know.
It's actually talking specifically about fornication because in the context, Alma is teaching his son.
Listen, Stephen Smoot, I don't really care.
But the truth is that scripture is used as a blanket qualifier of this absurd bonkers teaching that sex is a sin next to murder.
Lots of issues with this teaching. One of them
surprisingly
being the fact that it's putting two adults having consensual sex as more evil than people who beat children, people who commit like terrible frauds, you know, this laundry list of other terrible things where there are real victims is not as bad as you hurting God, Jesus himself, by having sex with your boyfriend. So it's putting the feelings of some imaginary person above like children who are the victims of abuse. It's so messed up. It's a very archaic way of looking at it. It's definitely like, you know, high-demand religions and cults, they always try and control people's sexuality, because if you can control people's sexuality, you can usually get them to channel that frustration and repression into the religion, become more devout,
more codependent.
We see that with Mormons all the time. Like a lot of the most psycho Mormons on Twitter and stuff, I'm like, you seem sexually repressed just by like the things you've said about sex, like, and just the way that you are is telling me that you are channeling your sexual repression into anger at me. Totally. Like, I'm not your issue here.
Oh, that's been a huge thing, was realizing how much, because I was so repressed as a Mormon. I felt like I had committed this sin next to murder when I had a wet dream. Ooh. For Christ's sake.
For Christ's sake.
For Christ's sake. For criminy. And, yeah, it's just, that's awful. Like, no kid should have to think that.
Do you think that I don't feel like the progressive, like, millennial Mormons, even though they, like, know the saying, like, it's the sin next to murder, you know, they wouldn't treat someone who was having sex outside of marriage worse than someone who beat up children. Do you know what I mean? Like, they would see it as...
They'd be like, it's like
the double think, isn't it? It's like they would never think that someone who's having sex with their boyfriend is worse than someone who beats up children, but it's like... they like interpret the scriptures like something different. Like do you know what I mean?
There are the errors of men, you know?
Yeah, so it's weird. So I don't even think they believe it anymore.
Yeah, maybe they don't, but the actual leadership has taught that.
Yeah, it's been a big theme of the church.
And elsewhere in the Book of Mormon, the most correct book of any book on earth, teaches that virtue is something that can be taken away. It talks about victims of rape specifically, saying that they were robbed of their virtue. What a horrifically clunky way of putting that.
Yeah, and God knows that if this book is written for our day and it's inspired by God, he's going to know that victims of sexual assault are going to be reading that. So you wouldn't phrase it like that if you were an all-knowing being. Like, come on, raise your standards.
Your virtue can't be taken away from you.
Yeah.
And what a hyper focus on virginity as a token of virtue.
Yep.
It's horrifying because this is, you know, written in a day where virgins were given as gifts to the prophet. They weren't seen as actual people with choices.
Yeah, number one, Brigham Young said, I think as much of taking a new wife as I do buying a cow.
I think that was Heber C. Kimball, but of the time, sure.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay, well anyway, polygamy was just inherently so sexist and so coercive and so pedophilic a lot of the time.
And so typical of so many high-demand religions.
Yep,
like,
absolutely
you have to see the pattern at some point.
There's a reason that every cult leader starts taking plural wives. Like, that's not coincidence. And Mormons expect us to believe that it's different with them, even though God hasn't really given an explanation. And it's like, okay, let's suppose that it is different, that Joseph Smith married 14-year-old girls. Let's suppose that it's different and he was inspired by God to do that. Don't you think an all-knowing being that would know that lots of cult leaders and other religious leaders claim that when it's not from him, wouldn't he, knowing that, want to give like a really thorough explanation so people knew that like this is different, like he's not having sex with this girl, or like whatever the explanation is, do you know what I mean? Because otherwise it's like, why would he want people following him when there is that parallel anyone can make? Like, why would God want you to be so kind of like, I don't know, flippant towards that without any real information? Like, surely a loving God who doesn't promote pedophilia would want to really lay it on thick with the like, here's why this is happening, I'm going to be very, you know what I mean? You wouldn't like be murky about something like that, would you?
It's all about learning to identify the patterns, because there's so many documentaries you can watch on various cults. You can watch the Buddha Field one, Holy Hell, on Netflix.
Yeah.
You can watch Going Clear. You can watch documentaries on Warren Jeffs and Scientology, all of it. And the pattern is always the same. The leader, who is this charismatic leader who has a sex drive, usually quite an voracious sex drive, and they institute these things as a way of channeling more sexual partners for themselves.
Yep.
And that's where those rules come from, is a way of keeping people isolated from their own body so that they can't regulate and find out what's normal. You'll notice that Mormons don't teach consent.
Yeah, they don't.
Like, it's just like you get married and you have sex, and it's like there's never any communication about when that's okay, when a person feels vulnerable and ready to do it.
And until recent years, like, Mormons didn't really know anything about sex going into marriage. Like, now I feel like the modern millennial Mormons, whatever you want to call them, like, they're better. They learn stuff. They didn't used to. It was just this messed up thing. I'm sure marital rape was extremely common throughout the history of the church. Also, going back to a point you made, so Richard G. Scott gave a talk once where he said that at times the Lord will prompt victims of sexual assault to ask themselves to what degree of responsibility they have in the crime. I'll have to find like the actual quote, but essentially saying like sometimes if you were raped, God will make you think, okay, so like how did I contribute to this happening? So victim blamey, so messed up. We've already got the church's teachings on modesty contributing to, you know, like rape culture.
Oh, that's like the literal worst thing that you can tell a victim. This man is supposed to be
a mouthpiece for God.
Like, imagine a child who's been sexually abused. The child didn't choose that. That's why we have laws, is because they're not able to choose and make, you know, an informed, conscious decision. So a child and adult relationship is always predatory. And yet that's one of the biggest things that victims of childhood grooming and sexual abuse suffer from, is believing that it's their fault. So especially fuck that, Richard G. Scott.
So Finding Neverland, the Michael Jackson documentary, is really, really good because it shows it's just a like brilliant look at what grooming actually looks like, how it plays out, why it's not as easy to spot as mothers and fathers might think. But one of the elements that's common in the grooming of children is like the children don't necessarily hate what's going on because they've been groomed. And so for then Richard G. Scott to say a quote like that, and you could be, whether you're a child or a teenager or an adult who, you know, who at some point was abused as a child, you're going to sit there and think about that, and you might have been in a situation where you're groomed and you kind of liked it at the time, or do you know what I mean, didn't hate it, didn't resist it in any way, and you're hearing from like this apostle in your church that you think speaks for God, that you're somehow like have a degree of responsibility. That's so messed up. And like, we don't have data on this kind of stuff, but like surely that's caused suicides. Like surely, because it's such a enormous trauma to get over, and then to hear like a leader from your church say something like that. And of course this is to contribute.
And of course that creates the perfect climate, going back to predators. It's just a statistical fact that there are predators out there in every single congregation, and they thrive in situations just like the Mormon church, these patriarchal, sex-shamed religions where they don't teach consent because they teach it's this one little narrow, tiny sexual experience. That's the only legitimate one. So we can't prepare you for a myriad of sexual experiences. And so you get predators who just absolutely thrive in that. And you can see it every single day on the news in Utah. It seems like every day there's a new bishop who's like caught molesting 7 kids, and we're all like, how did this happen?
And they continue to let bishops be in rooms alone with children. And under this, you know, the LDS Church has the attitude of like, well, you know, the way we're doing things is of God. We're not going to change because of, you know, pressure from ex-Mormons or pressure from apostates. But because they can't accept that a small or maybe they can accept and they just don't care, a small percentage of bishops will always be sexual predators. Like that is just like how statistics, you know,
but they're not
demographics work.
But they're not running background checks.
They're not running background checks. These people have no training for talking about sex with children. So we have so many friends who came out to their bishops and had horrifying experiences that traumatized them for lives. Like, these people are sexually repressed themselves. They are not equipped to talk to children about sex. No one should really be talking to children about sex except for like people that are trained to do it and there's a specific reason, or, you know, like their parents or whatever. Yeah, to have like a random bishop doing it and like instilling shame in them while they're doing it, and then also being in a room alone with them. It's so messed up.
I also want to add that like no one is a true villain and no one is a true hero, right? Like perpetrators are often victims themselves.
Yes.
And so, but this whole shame-based sexual climate is just like the perfect storm for everybody, because it makes it, if someone has a tendency to act out in these like sexually harmful ways, like child predators and things like that, it's like because of the shame that they're also internalizing, it's also causing them to do it creates like a high pressure situation for them to act at their worst.
Yeah.
And so like,
it's like how when you feel a ton of shame about watching pornography, it can almost make you watch it more, because the shame cycle makes you crave that release, that dopamine rush, that...
Exactly. You know. So like, look at the Catholic Church, and they're like, how does this keep happening? How do priests... We make these people be celibate, and then they start touching kids. What the fuck? How come this is happening? And it's like, don't you see that it's a matter of cause and effect? That causing people to repress their sexuality is leading them to act out in bad ways?
Also, it just makes life so miserable for Mormons once they are married, because you can't like teach people to be so ashamed of anything sex related for all this time and then expect a light switch to go on once they get married and have everything be great. Like, their brains have been conditioned their entire lives to associate sex with shame, sex with bad. Those neural pathways don't change on your wedding night. Like, that takes years of undoing if you've been taught that your whole life.
Yeah, we know so many Mormon couples.
So many.
Who get married and just like can't perform because it's just such an awful feeling.
Or they just never really get into it. They don't have good sex lives, and it's like, of course you don't. It's only in recent years that Mormons have even started like letting themselves read books or, you know, like learn anything. And
of course, Mormonism is coming out of this patriarchal culture where sex, and that's just to speak of like American culture generally, is that pleasure in sex was discouraged. You have Marky Peterson saying that the purpose of sex is not pleasure.
Oh, and they
it's for making children. So it's a woman who I guarantee you never came once in her marriage, and there of course
probably was super like pressured into like I guarantee a ton of Mormon women feel pressured.
Because it's not because it's
not about them anyway.
It's not about them.
Yeah, so they do it as like a marital duty. Upsetting phrase.
That's so sad.
That's sad.
You wonder why ex-Mormons get so angry when they look back and they're like, you turned me into this like tiny fragmented broken thing when I could have just been like living my full uninhibited self.
Mormon children will be told when they're like toddlers to not touch themselves, like at a time when it's really healthy to be exploring that. It's part of children's development and early sexual development, and they're being told no, that's bad. They don't know why. They have no concept of anything, like right from when they're toddlers. And then Mormons say to us like, you guys are so obsessed with sex, because we like might joke about it a lot, or you know, whatever, and it's like, you guys are obsessed with sex. Like, you can't even let a 3-year-old act out his natural impulses because you're so terrified of it. You think that 3-year-old is like it's so crazy.
The worst thing to me is adults talking about modesty of children.
Oh my god.
Like, you can't wear a tank top is like so freaky sexualization of children.
They say, I guess their justification is like, well, we're just preparing them for the future when they wear garments, so we're like setting up but it's like, it's just immediately, it's not, you know what I mean? It's just immediately, you know, they're seeing themselves as these objects. And it's also, they do the same thing with children that they do with adults, which is like, you know, like a guy can have his shirt off, but like a girl can't wear a bikini, stuff like that with children.
That's another thing that like patriarchal religions tend to do is shift all the blame of like sexual temptation onto women.
Yep.
So it's like, she is responsible in her dress for how I behave. She's responsible for the thoughts I have, rather than recognizing that thoughts come and go, and you can just like observe them coming in and you can observe them leaving, and it doesn't matter.
And if you're not like, get out, they go away quicker.
Yeah, but when you're like, oh my god, Satan's putting bad thoughts in my head, you become obsessed with it, and you create this biofeedback loop that's constantly getting aroused about your own repression.
I saw this girl tweet something the other day that said when she was in high school, I think it was, her neighbor asked her to stop wearing short shorts because she had teenage boys and she didn't want them to get aroused or something like that. Like putting, not even someone in your own just like this random person who's presumably in your ward, or like you have like some like maybe semi-close relationship but either way, entirely bizarre. Telling an adult woman telling a teenage girl, can you wear longer shorts because I have teenage sons.
Oh, our friend was doing a photo shoot in a public pool, and he was taking pictures of girls with a girl with a bikini, and someone came over and was like, it was that same kind of thing, like, I'm here with my son, and I would just appreciate it if you guys would leave.
It's like, how disempowering is that for your son? Like, your son is hearing you be like, I'm gonna go over and tell them to stop. Like,
he's an enraged sex monster, this boy. He'll come and get you.
Also in that situation, I'm like, it's definitely the dad, not the son.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, so messed up. The whole tie-in between modesty and chastity is so complex and messy.
Yeah, and again, at the end of the day, of course, it's always about control. That if you can keep people just strung tight and feeling like they're an enemy of their own body, then the war is over. Like, divide and conquer. Well, you've divided a person's self.
You also can't make people just repress their sexuality.
Right, it comes out.
Yeah, it's going to come out in a lot of unhealthy ways. But also, there's a reason that like almost every single Mormon boy thinks that he has at some point been addicted to porn, or he's like, every Mormon boy struggles with like something sexual related, even if it's just like jacking off, because it's not possible. We're not supposed to be like that.
And how harmful to teens whose brains are still developing, because the narratives that you adopt as a teenager, they get embedded in your neural circuitry. So when you're adopting this thing of like, I am a weak addict,
because you're doing stuff that every single person your age is and should be doing. So it's like you're setting this impossible standard that no one can reach, and then because it's also all behind closed doors, nobody's like fully clocking like, oh, every single person is struggling with this. It's just setting up this impossible standard, setting up this intense amount of shame, this shame cycle, which keeps you more attracted to, like, in the church, keeps you, begging God for forgiveness every night, keeps you trying harder to be active in this church.
It's convincing you you're sick so that they can sell you the medicine, which is going to church, and it costs money. We can't end this video without, of course, talking about the church's obsession with not just sex, but gay sex.
Yeah, they really think a lot about gay sex.
How do they do it? Does one penis envelop the other?
Does this look right to you?
Not the way God intended.
We all already know how terrible the Mormon church has been to LGBTQ people. They lobbied against gay marriage being legalized. They've taught endless, horrible, horrifying rhetoric in recent years. It used to be very, very harsh, like as our last video we did with Gary and Ernest, our gaytriarchs. Ernie was talking about how he was, both of them like faced threat of being expelled from church schools simply for being gay. They weren't even doing anything. Oh yeah, this is a time when BYU presidents literally told the student body, we don't want you here. We don't want you here. Yeah. Now they're like, oh, well, if you're being faithful, it's fine. But they used to, the things, someone also did a thing on Twitter that was like scrolling, they compiled a list of everything that gay people have ever been called in like church documents, and it was horrible. Chilling. It was like so completely dehumanizing of LGBTQ people, like just horrifying. It is surprising that for the book that was written for our day to, address the issues that we would most be wrestling with, that it says nothing about homosexuality. Yeah. Literally nothing. Nothing. I wonder why. I wonder if Joseph was just kind of like down for anything. I think Joseph was a bit cooler. I think he was, yeah. Yeah, that's a huge issue of our day. It's a huge issue the church has been involved with, so kind of weird that a book written for our day doesn't have any advice, not even a tiny nugget of advice for people that are gay and Mormon.
Though they've lightened their stance, the church is obviously is always one step forward, two steps back, and they're still spewing out just such terrible rhetoric and being so unskillful in the way that they handle LGBT relationships that they're just creating these endless cycles of suffering in the LGBT community.
Yeah, it's so obvious that they really don't know what to do, because at this point their recommendation is they're not recommend that people marry women anymore, which they did do. I don't know, well, I'm saying women like I'm using like a gay man as the example here, but yeah, they're not recommending that people marry women anymore, so they're just saying be chaste, stay faithful. But they know that's not working.
Right.
But they have nowhere else to go with it.
And it is a double standard, because for a heterosexual couple, you're allowed to kiss and cuddle and hold hands and do those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But you're not even allowed to have those simple, like, chaste relationships in a gay situation. So it's like, it is a double standard, and one that, again, is only going to bring out the worst in everybody.
It also highlights how juvenile the church's attitude to sex and intimacy is, and how much they don't understand the connection between sex and intimacy.
Right.
Because it's like, even outside of the sexual stuff, a gay person craves intimacy with people of the same gender, which, you know, they're not allowed to kiss, they're not allowed to cuddle, all that stuff. So it's like, I mean, yeah, all of the teachings on sex are so bad and they just like isolate sex to be this like one thing, and it's all physical, and there's never been any kind of like institute lesson or like marriage class or
yeah, where's the Mormon Tantra?
Yeah, like where they don't have any resources, like they clearly do not understand sex and intimacy is basically what I'm saying.
Exactly.
Like they don't understand, it's like sexuality is such a complex thing, there's so much to learn about it, and they just have this very childlike, narrow view of it.
Because again, they're the ones who are constantly opposing even sex ed in school. I never had sex ed.
Wow.
My parents were like, no, you'll just learn about it on your wedding night. Thank you so much for joining us in this video about sex. This is going to be a little mini-series wherein we talk about the most harmful Mormon teachings, and of course the ones about sex are some of the most harmful.
We also really want you guys to share your experiences in the comments below, how potentially maybe you were harmed by this teaching. I mean, if you were Mormon, you probably were. So share what you feel comfortable sharing, make it a safe space, support each other. And yeah, we're happy that you're here. Please support us on Patreon if you find this video valuable and you want to help us.
Yeah, every dollar helps.
Every dollar helps.
No amount too low for these bitches.
Or too high. Cool, bye.
Bye.